Well, it was on that New Year's Day, 1969, when we had this conversation, and I never saw him again after that. The first thing we talked about, when I arrived there, he showed me the watch. You know, he'd received it Christmas, and it was in the box with the card, and everything was there. And he asked me what I thought of it. Was it a good watch? He had the attitude that maybe his mother had stiffed him and given him a cheap watch. But the watch was a Zodiac watch, and it had that little symbol on the face. He'd been fired from Valley Springs, and I know that he really sent a lot of resumes to get that job, and he liked it over there. And he got fired, and it looked like he wasn't going to teach anymore. I was concerned about what he was going to do, and I went over there to kind of pep him up and talk to him about career choices and that sort of thing, and started asking him what he was going to do. And through some conversation, we got up to a point where he was talking about being a professional criminal. He didn't need a good resume for that. He could do it anyway. He said he would give himself an identity and write letters to the editors, and he'd have a name, and it would be Zodiac. I told him, I thought, well, you could have a better name than that, and he wasn't buying any of that. He was going to be Zodiac. So we got in the car, and he drove me up to Blue Rock Springs Country Club, and we drove through the parking lot. We talked earlier when he talked about setting up this random killing situation. He said he knew some places where they parked, and he drove by there and showed me that place. And then after we passed through there, we went back around to Lake Herman Road and came in past that site. And we stopped there, and Leigh seemed to want to linger there and look at the place, and he described what he would like to do to some girl at that place. And it wasn't pretty. When I was sitting there at that spot, he kind of kept slipping from future tense into past tense on some of what he was saying to me there. And I began to think maybe this is something that was already history.
I went out there at midnight one time, and the thing about Lake Herman Road, it's not just dark, it's pitch dark. This is a country road. I mean, there are cows, and I cannot see my hands, and yet the bullets that were fired by Zodiac at a run are in a circle.
Sometime, well, I knew him, he showed me a pistol with a pen light attached to the barrel with masking tape. And he says, point that at the wall and then look through the sight. And I did, and the spot was in line with the sight. I could see that if you fired it, the bullet would go where that spot was.
Arthur Lee Allen, according to his brother Ron, was left-handed when he was born. Back in those days when he was born in 36, I think. Back in those days when you were born, it was kind of a scourge to be left-handed, and his mother forced him to right-handed.
Leigh was ambidextrous. I never noticed a preference for either hand, except I do know that he did a single twisting forward 1.5 the way a left-hander would, and his double twister twisted in the right-hand direction, which, to me is an impossible amount of confusion. I can't imagine how he would accomplish that, but it is an indication of a great deal of left-hand, right-hand confusion.
I always felt if he was actually the author of those letters, he wrote them with his right hand, And Toschi and Armstrong from San Francisco Police Department felt the same way. They tried to get him to right-handed. When they did the search warrant at the Sonoma trailer And he just scribbled. He claimed he couldn't write with his right hand.
Earlier the same day, he used that phrase about picking the little darlings off as they come bouncing off the bus. He was into a rant about his feelings about the establishment and about the school system and one thing or another. So that was a part of blowing off steam. Before I left, I said to Leigh, I said, you really better think about this stuff a long time before you commit yourself to do anything. And he said, it's too late for that.
Don came to my office one day and said, you know, I'm really troubled about something that's occurred.
I cogitated, I thought about it, and I stewed about it, and eventually I went to the Pomona police and tried to tell somebody there what I thought, and that I suspected that Leigh was the Zodiac.
Don told me that last time he was with Leigh, or that he made a statement he was going to kill the kiddies they come bouncing off the bus. And then that was the phrase that the Zodiac used. So Don got alarmed and he went to the Pomona police, and because he was living in Pomona at the time, filed a report and nothing came of it.
The cop was an ideal cop. He was a big, handsome guy, and his name was Stone or Granite or Slate or something on that order, maybe Bullet. And he listened to me for a while, and then I think he just turned it off. Nothing ever happened.
So I called a policeman in Manhattan Beach, who I knew personally, and just said, who do you call in San Francisco? He said he'd look into it. So he got Armstrong, Inspector Armstrong, to come down and give us guys, Don and I, an interview, what we knew about Leigh.
I didn't have as many details then as I can remember now, but I was sure it was Leigh.
They were going to get a warrant and go to his trailer, and they didn't go to the house simultaneously, and I think that was a mistake they made.
I really expected something would come of that, and something would be done, and eventually it would, it would hit the news, that arrests and all of that sort of thing. Nothing happened.
I became involved in a case by attrition. The investigators that were handling it retired, passed away, whatever, and I didn't have an intricate knowledge of the case because I was taking it over from somebody else just simply because somebody had to do it. I began really reviewing stuff. I got copies of the affidavits of the reports for the search warrant of San Francisco Police Department, and I read them, and I thought, there was more to Arthur Leigh Allen than met the eye. I felt that San Francisco, after they served a search warrant in Sonoma, maybe should have looked at him a little harder. I'm not trying to say anything disparaging about them, but it just seemed like he was more of a viable suspect than they looked at that time.
I was off duty at the time Leigh Allen came up as a suspect. I was recovering from surgery, and Inspector Armstrong called and asked me if I wanted to go along on the search warrant when they served the warrant over in Santa Rosa. They served the search warrant, and then he called me later and told me about the results and everything. And the search warrant didn't prove any results. You got to follow the evidence, like in a money case, money laundering. You got to follow the money. Well, in criminal investigation, you got to follow the evidence. You can't make the guy fit the evidence. You got to make the evidence fit the individual. And in this particular case, it never did. Although he was certainly a subject of interest, he fit the general physical description. He had the background. Whether or not I never met the man, he had the killer instinct. I don't know.
After I looked at it and recontacted Cheney and re-interviewed him, I thought, and he came up with a few more things to add to it. Things like Arthur Leigh Allen purposely misspelling words, which the Zodiac did in his letters all the time. There were so many circumstances that Cheney talked about Arthur Leigh Allen that fit right in with him that I felt that we'd better take another look at him.